The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the backyard of the Henderson family home in Cedar Falls, Pennsylvania, on September 15, 2012. It was one of those perfect late summer days where the heat had finally broken, and children could play outside without wilting under the oppressive humidity that had dominated the season. 8-year-old Emma Henderson and her 6-year-old brother Noah were making the most of their Saturday freedom, their laughter echoing through the quiet suburban neighborhood as they engaged in their favorite game of hide-and-seek. Their mother, Sarah Henderson, was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she last heard their voices around 4:30 in the afternoon. She had grown accustomed to the rhythmic pattern of their play, Noah's excited squeals when he discovered Emma's hiding spot, Emma's patient coaching when it was Noah's turn to hide, and the inevitable arguments over who was it next. The sounds of their play were the soundtrack of her domestic life, as familiar and comforting as the hum of the washing machine or the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. When the house fell silent around 5 o'clock, Sarah initially felt relief. The children often wore themselves out and would retreat to their rooms for quiet activities or sometimes even a nap. She continued chopping vegetables for the stew she planned to serve when her husband Mark returned from his business trip that evening. It wasn't until she called them for dinner at 6:15 that the first tendrils of concern began to creep into her consciousness. "Emma! Noah! Dinner time!" she called from the back door, expecting to see them come running from wherever they had wandered in their expansive backyard. The Henderson property backed up to nearly 3 acres of woods, providing an ideal playground for imaginative children. When no response came, Sarah stepped outside and called again, louder this time. The only answer was the rustling of leaves in the gentle evening breeze. Sarah walked the perimeter of the yard, checking behind the garden shed, under the large oak tree where they often built fort, and around the swing set that Mark had installed the previous spring. She peered into the tree line, calling their names with increasing urgency. The woods had always been off-limits without adult supervision, but children had a way of forgetting rules when adventure called. By 6:45, Sarah's concern had escalated to panic. She called Mark, who was still 2 hours away from home, and then immediately dialed 911. The dispatcher was initially reassuring. Children wandering off during play was common, and most were found within hours. But as Sarah provided details about the extensive woods behind their property, the tone of the conversation shifted. Officers would be dispatched immediately. Officer Janet Rodriguez was the first to arrive at 7:10 p.m. A veteran of the Cedar Falls Police Department with 15 years of experience, she had handled dozens of missing child cases. Most ended with children found hiding in closets, at neighbors' houses, or simply having lost track of time at a local park. But as she walked the Henderson property and listened to Sarah's account of the afternoon, something felt different about this case. Rodriguez immediately called for backup and requested the K-9 unit. The bloodhounds arrived just as the sun was beginning to set, and their handlers, Officers Mike Chen and Lisa Thompson, began working the scene. The dogs picked up the children's scent trail easily from their bedroom, tracking it through the house and into the backyard. The trail led directly to the edge of the woods, where it simply vanished. "It's like they just disappeared into thin air," Chen reported to Rodriguez, his confusion evident. The dogs had circled the area multiple times, whining and pawing at the ground where the scent ended abruptly. There was no indication the children had continued deeper into the woods, no trace of them doubling back toward the house, and no evidence they had been picked up by a vehicle. By 8:30 p.m., additional units had arrived, and a systematic search of the woods was underway. Officer Rodriguez had divided the search area into a grid pattern, with teams of 2 officers equipped with high-powered flashlights covering each section methodically. The woods were dense but not impenetrable, with well-worn deer paths crisscrossing through the undergrowth. If the children had wandered in and become lost, they should have been found quickly. Mark Henderson arrived home at 9:15 p.m. to find his front yard illuminated by police vehicles and filled with searchers. His wife met him at the car, her face streaked with tears and her voice breaking as she tried to explain what had happened. Mark, a software engineer known for his logical approach to problems, immediately began questioning every detail. Where exactly had Sarah last seen the children? What were they wearing? Had they mentioned any plans or destinations during their play? The details Sarah provided painted a picture of a normal afternoon that had somehow gone horribly wrong. Emma had been wearing her favorite purple t-shirt with a unicorn design and denim shorts. Noah was dressed in a red Pokémon shirt and khaki cargo shorts. Both children were wearing their usual play shoes, Emma's light-up sneakers, and Noah's dinosaur-themed tennis shoes. They had been carrying their favorite toy, a bright blue rubber ball that Noah had received for his birthday the previous month. As the search continued through the night, additional resources were brought in. The Pennsylvania State Police arrived with their own K-9 units and search specialists. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging cameras was dispatched from the state capitol. Volunteers from the community began arriving after news of the missing children spread through social media and local news outlets. Detective Amanda Walsh, a specialist in missing persons cases with the state police, took over the investigation at dawn on September 16th. Walsh had worked dozens of child abduction cases throughout her 12-year career, and she brought a systematic approach that combined cutting-edge investigative techniques with old-fashioned detective work. Her first step was to expand the search area exponentially while simultaneously conducting detailed interviews with everyone who had contact with the Henderson family. The interviews revealed a family that was, by all accounts, normal and loving. The Hendersons had lived in Cedar Falls for 6 years, having moved there when Mark took a position with a local tech company. Sarah worked part-time as a graphic designer from her home office, allowing her to be present for the children after school. The family was active in their community, regularly attending St. Matthew's Episcopal Church and participating in neighborhood events. Neighbors described Emma and Noah as well-behaved children who played well together despite their age difference. Emma was characterized as responsible and mature for her 8 years, often looking after her younger brother during their outdoor adventures. Noah was described as energetic and imaginative, with a particular fascination for dinosaurs and superhero stories. There were no reports of behavioral problems, no indication of family strife, and no history of the children wandering away from home. The search of the woods expanded to cover nearly 50 square miles over the following days. Teams of searchers worked in coordinated patterns, covering every ravine, creek bed, and clearing within the expanded perimeter. Divers searched the 2 small ponds located within the search area, while specialized teams used ground-penetrating radar to examine areas where the terrain might conceal hidden cavities or old wells. Detective Walsh also initiated a comprehensive investigation into potential abduction scenarios. Sex offenders within a 50-mile radius were interviewed and their alibis verified. The family's financial records were examined for any evidence of ransom demands or unusual activity. Security camera footage from businesses along the routes leading to and from the Henderson neighborhood was collected and analyzed frame by frame. 1 week after the disappearance, Walsh held a press conference that was broadcast throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. The images of Emma and Noah that appeared on television screens across the region showed 2 smiling children who looked like they could be anyone's kids. Emma's dark hair was pulled back in the ponytail she favored for playing outside, while Noah's sandy brown hair was tousled in the way that suggested he had been running around all day. The press conference generated hundreds of tips, each of which was carefully investigated by Walsh's team. Reported sightings came in from across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. A gas station attendant in Harrisburg was certain he had seen 2 children matching their description getting into a blue sedan. A woman in Wheeling, West Virginia, reported seeing children who looked like Emma and Noah at a rest stop along Interstate 70. Each lead was pursued with the same thoroughness, and each ultimately led nowhere. As September turned to October, the massive search effort gradually scaled back. The helicopter flights became less frequent, the number of daily searchers diminished, and the media attention began to focus on other stories. But Detective Walsh refused to let the case grow cold. She continued to follow leads, interview potential witnesses, and coordinate with other law enforcement agencies across the region. The Henderson family struggled to cope with the devastating uncertainty. Sarah stopped working entirely, spending her days coordinating with volunteer searchers and managing the social media campaign that friends had established to keep Emma and Noah's story in the public eye. Mark took extended leave from his job to help with the search efforts, using his technical skills to maintain databases of tips and organize search schedules. The strain on their marriage was evident to anyone who spent time with them. Sarah blamed herself for not keeping closer watch on the children, replaying every moment of that September afternoon and wondering what she could have done differently. Mark threw himself into the search efforts with an intensity that bordered on obsession, often staying in the woods until well after dark and refusing to accept that the official search was winding down. Dr. Patricia Summers, a child psychologist who volunteered her services to the family, helped them understand that their reactions were normal responses to an abnormal situation. The complete absence of information about what had happened to Emma and Noah created a unique type of psychological trauma. Parents could mourn the loss of a child who had died, and they could hold on to hope for a child who had been abducted and might return. But the Henderson situation offered neither closure nor clear hope. As winter approached, the active search effort transitioned to a monitoring phase. Detective Walsh continued to work the case, but the daily searches ended, as weather conditions made them impractical. The woods behind the Henderson home became covered with snow, preserving whatever evidence might still exist beneath a white blanket that would remain until spring. The first anniversary of the disappearance brought renewed media attention and a fresh wave of tips. America's Most Wanted featured the case in a special segment, broadcasting the children's photos to millions of viewers nationwide. The segment generated over 300 new tips, each of which was investigated with the same care as those received in the first week after the disappearance. By this time, Detective Walsh had developed a theory about what might have happened, though she kept it largely to herself pending additional evidence. The complete disappearance of the scent trail suggested that the children had been picked up at the edge of the woods, likely by someone they knew and trusted. The fact that no ransom demand had ever been made argued against a traditional kidnapping for money. The absence of any sexual predator activity in the area before or after the disappearance made that motive less likely as well. Walsh's theory centered on the possibility that someone known to the family had taken the children, either impulsively or as part of a planned abduction. This person would have had to be familiar with the family's routines and the layout of their property. They would have needed a vehicle capable of quickly transporting two children without attracting attention. Most importantly, they would have needed a destination where two children could be hidden without neighbors or associates becoming suspicious. The investigation expanded to include a deeper examination of everyone in the Hendersons' extended social circle. Church members, neighbors, Mark's co-workers, and Sarah's clients were all interviewed multiple times. Background checks were conducted on anyone who had regular access to the Henderson home, or who had expressed unusual interest in the children. One name that appeared repeatedly in the investigation was Paul Brennan, a 43-year-old handyman who had done work for several families in the Hendersons' neighborhood over the past 2 years. Brennan had replaced the Hendersons' back deck the previous spring and had returned twice to make minor repairs. Neighbors reported that he seemed particularly interested in families with young children and often lingered longer than necessary when children were playing nearby. Detective Walsh's investigation of Brennan revealed a concerning pattern. He had been fired from 2 previous jobs following complaints about inappropriate behavior around children, though no formal charges had ever been filed. His work truck, a blue pickup with a covered bed, matched descriptions provided by witnesses who had reported suspicious vehicles in the neighborhood around the time of the disappearance. When Walsh attempted to locate Brennan for questioning, she discovered that he had left Cedar Falls just 3 days after Emma and Noah's disappearance. His landlord reported that Brennan had paid his remaining lease obligations in cash and had moved out with very little notice. He had provided no forwarding address and had disconnected his cell phone service. The search for Paul Brennan became a priority for law enforcement agencies across multiple states. His photograph was distributed to police departments throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, and his information was entered into national databases for missing persons and fugitives. But Brennan seemed to have vanished as completely as the children themselves. Years passed with no significant developments in the case. The Henderson family gradually rebuilt their lives around the permanent absence of Emma and Noah, though the pain never diminished. Sarah returned to work part-time, finding that the creative demands of graphic design provided some distraction from her grief. Mark changed jobs, moving to a position that required less travel and allowed him to be home more often. They considered moving away from Cedar Falls several times, but ultimately decided to stay. Their house became a sort of monument to their missing children, with Emma and Noah's rooms preserved exactly as they had been on that September afternoon. The family continued to hold out hope that someday the children would return, walking through the front door as if they had simply been away at summer camp. Detective Walsh retired from the state police in 2019, but she never stopped working the Henderson case. Even in retirement, she continued to follow leads and coordinate with active investigators. The case had become personal for her in a way that few others had during her career. She felt a responsibility to Emma and Noah that transcended her professional obligations. In early 2024, Walsh received a call that would reignite the investigation in an unexpected way. A real estate developer named Jennifer Collins had contacted the state police after discovering something unusual while surveying land for a potential housing development. The property in question was located nearly 15 miles from the Henderson home, in a remote area of forest that had never been included in the original search perimeter. Collins had been walking the property lines with a surveyor when her dog, a German Shepherd named Max, had begun acting strangely near a cluster of old-growth pine trees. The dog had started digging frantically at the base of one particular tree, whining and pawing at something buried beneath years of accumulated pine needles and forest debris. What Max had uncovered was a child's toy, a bright blue rubber ball that had somehow retained much of its color, despite being buried in the forest for over a decade. Collins had immediately recognized the significance of her discovery and had contacted authorities without disturbing the scene further. When Detective Walsh arrived at the site, now working as a consultant to the state police, she felt her pulse quicken as she examined the ball. The toy matched the exact description provided by the Henderson family in 2012. It was the right size, the right color, and showed the kind of wear patterns consistent with being a favorite plaything of a 6-year-old boy. But the location of the discovery raised more questions than it answered. The site was nowhere near the Henderson home or any of the areas that had been searched extensively in the weeks following the disappearance. The ball had been buried approximately 2 feet underground, suggesting that its placement had been deliberate rather than accidental. A full forensic team was dispatched to the site within hours of the discovery. The area around the pine tree was cordoned off and treated as a potential crime scene. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to scan for additional buried objects or disturbances in the soil. Cadaver dogs were deployed to search for any indication of human remains. The forensic examination of the blue ball revealed trace amounts of DNA that could potentially be linked to Noah Henderson, though the degradation caused by 12 years of burial made definitive identification challenging. More significantly, the ball also contained DNA from an unknown individual, someone who was not in any law enforcement database. The discovery of the ball prompted a renewed search of the immediate area. Teams of searchers worked in expanding circles from the original find site, looking for any additional evidence that might provide clues about what had happened to Emma and Noah. The search expanded to cover nearly 5 square miles of dense forest, much of it terrain that was difficult to access and had likely never been thoroughly explored. On the 3rd day of the expanded search, searchers made another discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Hidden beneath a pile of rocks and fallen branches, approximately 300 yards from where the ball had been found, they uncovered a makeshift shelter that appeared to have been constructed many years earlier. The shelter was crude but functional, built from fallen logs and covered with a tarp that had been weighted down with rocks. Inside the shelter, investigators found evidence of long-term habitation: empty food cans, water containers, and clothing that had deteriorated beyond recognition. Most significantly, they found additional items that appeared to have belonged to children. Among the artifacts recovered from the shelter were fragments of fabric that matched the clothing Emma and Noah had been wearing on the day they disappeared. A small piece of purple material with remnants of a unicorn design was consistent with Emma's favorite t-shirt. Threads of red fabric appeared to match Noah's Pokémon shirt. The clothing fragments were sent for DNA analysis, though the degraded condition of the material made positive identification unlikely. The discovery of the shelter suggested a scenario that was both hopeful and terrifying. It appeared that Emma and Noah had been held in this remote location for some period of time after their disappearance. The presence of their belongings and the evidence of sustained habitation suggested they had been alive, at least initially. But the condition of the shelter and the fact that it had clearly been abandoned for years raised dark questions about their ultimate fate. Detective Walsh worked closely with forensic specialists to reconstruct what might have happened at the site. The shelter showed signs of hasty abandonment, with personal items left behind, and no attempt made to conceal the location. This suggested that whoever had been keeping Emma and Noah there had been forced to leave quickly, possibly because they feared discovery or faced some other urgent threat. The investigation into the shelter site revealed additional disturbing details. Forensic analysis of the soil around the structure detected traces of accelerants, suggesting that attempts had been made to burn evidence. Chemical analysis of water samples from a nearby stream showed elevated levels of bleach and other cleaning agents, indicating systematic efforts to destroy forensic evidence. Most troubling of all was the discovery of what appeared to be restraint devices, lengths of chain and rope that had been anchored to trees around the shelter. The positioning of these restraints suggested they had been used to confine individuals within a limited area around the structure. The discovery painted a picture of captivity that was difficult for investigators to process. As news of the discovery spread, the investigation took on new urgency. The FBI became involved, bringing additional resources and expertise in child abduction cases. A task force was formed that included local, state, and federal investigators, all working to piece together what had happened in the years following Emma and Noah's disappearance. The renewed investigation also brought Paul Brennan back into focus. The timeline of the shelter's abandonment appeared to coincide with several other unsolved disappearances of children throughout Pennsylvania and Ohio during the mid-2010s. The geographic distribution of these cases suggested someone who was mobile and familiar with remote areas throughout the region. In May 2024, investigators received a break in the case that came from an unexpected source. A woman named Carol Martinez contacted the FBI after seeing news coverage of the discovery in the woods. Martinez reported that her late husband Robert had worked as a park ranger in Ohio from 2010 to 2016 and had frequently mentioned encountering a suspicious individual during his patrols. According to Martinez, her husband had repeatedly encountered a man matching Paul Brennan's description at various remote camping sites throughout southeastern Ohio. The man had always been alone when spotted, but Robert had noted the presence of children's items, toys, clothing, and food containers at several of the sites. Robert had filed reports about these encounters, but since no missing children cases were being investigated in the area at the time, no action had been taken. Martinez provided investigators with copies of her husband's personal notes about these encounters, detailed records that he had kept separate from his official reports. The notes described a pattern of behavior that was consistent with someone who was holding children in remote locations while moving frequently to avoid detection. The information from Martinez led investigators to expand their search to include several locations in Ohio where Robert Martinez had reported suspicious activity. At 3 different sites, searchers found evidence of temporary camps that matched the pattern of the shelter discovered in Pennsylvania. Each site showed signs of hasty abandonment and contained traces of children's belongings. At one site near the Ohio-West Virginia border, investigators made a discovery that brought the case to a horrifying conclusion. Buried beneath what appeared to be an old campfire pit, they found human remains that forensic analysis would later confirm belonged to both Emma and Noah Henderson. The condition of the remains made it difficult to determine the exact cause of death, but the positioning and associated evidence suggested that the children had been killed and buried at the site sometime in late 2014 or early 2015, approximately 2 years after their disappearance. Additional evidence found at the site confirmed that they had been held captive for an extended period before their deaths. The discovery of Emma and Noah's remains brought both closure and renewed anguish to their family. Sarah and Mark Henderson had maintained hope for 12 years that their children might somehow still be alive. Learning that they had been killed after years of captivity was perhaps worse than never knowing their fate at all. The investigation into their deaths continued, but Paul Brennan was never found. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement agencies across multiple states, he seemed to have disappeared as completely as his victims once had. The FBI maintained an active warrant for his arrest and continued to follow leads, but as years passed without any confirmed sightings, the likelihood of finding him alive diminished. In 2024, Detective Walsh, now in her 70s but still sharp and determined, received one final piece of information about the case. A man named David Kumar contacted her after reading about the case online. Kumar reported that he had been camping in a remote area of Montana in the summer of 2016 when he had encountered an individual matching Brennan's description. According to Kumar, the man had seemed agitated and paranoid, frequently looking over his shoulder and jumping at unexpected sounds. During a brief conversation around a shared campfire, the man had made several disturbing comments about children and had spoken about needing to, quote, start over somewhere new. Kumar had thought the encounter strange at the time, but had not connected it to any criminal activity until reading about the Henderson case years later. The Montana lead was investigated thoroughly, but no additional evidence was found to confirm Brennan's presence in the area. However, the timing of Kumar's encounter occurring shortly after the discovery of the final shelter site suggested that Brennan may have continued to move westward after abandoning his activities in Pennsylvania and Ohio. The Emma and Noah Henderson case was officially closed in terms of determining what had happened to the children, but the search for Paul Brennan remained active. Their story became a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities that exist even in seemingly safe suburban environments and the importance of maintaining vigilance about children's safety. For the Henderson family, the discovery of their children's remains marked the end of one kind of suffering and the beginning of another. They finally had answers about Emma and Noah's fate, but those answers brought with them the knowledge that their children had endured years of captivity before their deaths. The blue ball that had led to the final resolution of the case was preserved as evidence, a small toy that had somehow survived to tell a story that its young owner could no longer share. The case highlighted the dedication of law enforcement professionals like Detective Walsh, who refused to let cold cases remain forgotten. It also demonstrated the power of community involvement in solving crimes, as tips from citizens like Jennifer Collins and David Kumar proved crucial to understanding what had happened to Emma and Noah. Today, the woods behind the Henderson home are quiet once again. The family has since moved away from Cedar Falls, unable to bear living so close to the place where their children had vanished. But the memory of Emma and Noah lives on in the community they left behind, a reminder of innocence lost and the ongoing need to protect the vulnerable among us. The case remains a subject of study for law enforcement professionals and criminologists, offering insights into the psychology of child predators and the challenges of investigating cases where victims are taken to remote locations far from their homes. It serves as a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, disguised as helpful neighbors and community members who gain trust through seemingly innocent interactions. For Detective Walsh, now fully retired, the Henderson case represents both her greatest success and her most haunting failure. She succeeded in solving the mystery of what happened to Emma and Noah, bringing their remains home and providing their family with answers. But she was never able to bring their killer to justice, a failure that continues to weigh on her conscience. The bright blue ball that Noah had carried into the woods that September afternoon in 2012 had somehow survived 12 years of burial to become the key that unlocked the mystery of his and his sister's disappearance. In the end, it was a child's simple toy that provided the evidence needed to solve one of Pennsylvania's most perplexing missing persons cases, proving that sometimes the smallest clues can reveal the darkest truths.